Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have hit a month of football. Week 4 is upon us, and Week 3 was crazy thanks to the weather. We needed some rain. We wanted some rain. Unfortunately, we got it on a Friday, and it was early enough that it affected a lot of the games for teams in our areas, but we will talk about what happened on that Friday. We will look ahead to Week 4. We are inching closer to district play. We have the two big ones, Sherman and Denison, are in district play, and we'll start to ease into it with some other teams next week, and then by the end of the month, everybody will be done with non-district play and in district full-time. We can start talking about playoff races, district champion races, all that sort of good stuff. But we still have a couple more weeks of tune-up non-district action to talk to. So we'll do what we always do. We will start from the top. We'll work our way down. We will recap what happened for that team last week, and we will look ahead to what happens this week. And we will start at the top with the Sherman Bearcats. They will be hosting Frisco Lebanon Trail on Friday night at 7 o'clock in a District 6-5A Division I contest. Sherman comes in at 1-2 and 0-1 after they lost their district opener last week 49-34 against Frisco Centennial. And Frisco Lebanon Trail comes in to the game 1-1. They had the district bye last week, so this is their first game against district competition. This was a game last year that Sherman won 28-3 and was their first district win. Their season is following the same pattern as last year with a alternating loss-win-loss, and they're going to look to get back on track against Lebanon Trail because of that loss last week, 49-34 against Frisco Centennial in a game where they led 34-14 at the end of the third quarter, and then Centennial scored 5 times in the fourth quarter to come back and pull out that win. They used obviously offense. They got a special teams touchdown where they blocked punt recovery in the end zone. They forced some turnovers, turned those into points, and that's how Sherman was able to go from up 20 to losing by 15 in that game. For 3 quarters, it was exactly what you would have wanted to see. We talked about last week after beating Princeton in double overtime, to build up that confidence, to bounce back from that opening loss against Denison. What were they going to look like against Princeton? And they go and win that game in the double overtime. So now you've got this momentum going into the start of district, and you come out and you're up 27-14 at halftime. You score a touchdown in the third quarter to extend that lead, and things are looking really good. And then it just all fell apart there in the final 12 minutes against Centennial. Kane Bowen had 20 carries, 146 yards, and 2 touchdown runs. Caleb Orr, 20 of 30 passing for 237 yards. Had a touchdown pass to Randy Nelson, and also had 2 interceptions. Trevor Pugh had a touchdown run. Nelson led the Colby Ray Short led the receivers, 7 catches for 115 yards. He also had a touchdown run as well. And Nelson had 4 catches for 46 yards. Colin Macon 3 catches for 44. And like we said, it's just finding a way to finish. That was something that Coach Allman talked about after the Princeton game, because Sherman led in that one 28-7 at halftime and ended up having to go to not just the first overtime but the second overtime to pull out that win. And so obviously he wanted to see a better performance in the second half. And as he said after the game, if there was a silver lining, it was we went from playing really good for 2 quarters to playing really good for 3 quarters, and now we've got to do it for 4 quarters. We have to find a way to put together a complete game. And they're going to try to do that against the Lebanon Trail team that wants it. They saw everything that happened last week, and they want to start their district play with a win. If there is an interesting outcome for this matchup, it's because Lebanon Trail played Princeton the week before Sherman did. They opened with Princeton, and they were able to win against Princeton in a close game. It was in regulation 24-23, and they won on a blocked extra point to keep it from going to overtime. And then they lost to Van Alstyne in a game that they almost came back and won that one. They were down big at halftime, and they put together a rally before falling short. And then they had their bye last week. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Sherman. Obviously, you're back at home. You're in a situation where you have your bye coming up, and so you want to get sort of that positive confidence back. And this is a good setup for you to do that. But it's gonna, obviously, you don't know how kids are going to react when you have a finish the way that they did last week. We saw what they did in bouncing back from the first loss to winning that game against Princeton. Can they find that same scenario, those same feelings, and get back in this race because it's a long road. They've got 7 more games. All hope is not lost after losing your opener, because half the teams in the district are going to do it. But you got to get going in the right direction. And again, they're sort of on the same path as last year. If they win this game, and they beat some of the same people if they beat the same people they did last year, and then find a way to get another win or two along the way, then they'll be in the mix. But obviously, you let a game that you had pretty well in hand slip away through a variety of reasons. It's not just you can look and say, well, it was this one thing that did it. There were a couple different reasons that game got away from them. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because if it was just one thing, you can say, well, that's the reason. If we just fix that one thing, we should be better. But obviously, that's the big question for Sherman. Can you bounce back again? This time you're at home, and can you get some positive momentum going into your bye? Obviously, the offense has been better the last 2 weeks. Getting into the 30s after getting shut out in the opener. In this game, they put up a little over 400 yards of total offense. I think there's a pretty good balance. In this game they ran it 35 times. They threw it 30 times. So you're not looking at a situation where teams can kind of focus on one side of the offense and the play calling. But it's just one of those things where it really just snowballed there in that final 12 minutes. And there's there are 2 or 3 things you look at and you say, well, if that doesn't happen, they probably win. If they would have gotten a stop on 4th and goal, instead of giving up a touchdown, they stay up 20 points. If you don't get the kick blocked, and recovered in the end zone, that's a touchdown right there. If it goes out of the end zone, it's only a safety, so that's a 5-point difference. If you get the punt off, obviously that 7 points, they have to work for it and actually put together a drive. And so it changes everything into how the rest of that game could have gone. But it's in the past. I'm sure that they've wiped it away just like they did with the first loss. And can they find a way to win when they host Lebanon Trail? Again, it's 7 o'clock on Friday for their first home game in District 6-5A Division I action. They played on Thursday, so they didn't have to worry about the weather that blew through on Friday, but just about everybody else did. And one of those teams was the Dennis Neal Jackets. They're going to be opening District 7-5A Division II play by hosting Greenville at Munson Stadium at 7:30 on Friday. Denison comes in at 2-1. They won last week 21-13 against Kennedale, and Greenville comes in at 1-2. They won their opener, and then they've lost the last 2 weeks, including 56-14 against Chapel Hill. This was a close game last year. Denison obviously got off to a 3-1 start, winning this game, and all three of the wins were close. And it was 34-27. Denison had to hang on to win that game, keep Greenville from potentially either forcing overtime or going to or winning the game outright on a final possession. And they're coming off a close game that got stopped at halftime. This was, like I said, this is one of the games where things were going along great. We got to halftime. It was 21-13 at halftime. After a 7-0 lead after the first quarter, we had 4 touchdowns scored in 6.5 minutes between the two teams. We go to the locker room, bands play, everybody's coming back off onto the field, off the locker room, gonna start warming up, and then weather delay because of lightning in the area. Stayed that way for a little over an hour, and then they decided to call it as we were approaching 10 o'clock. Because the real actual rain and weather had not arrived yet, and it was coming, and we probably weren't gonna start until after 11 o'clock, maybe closer to midnight, and they just said that's a no-go. So Denison does get a win, 21-13. It was an interesting 2 quarters because, like I said, Denison goes up 7-0, and then they're actually up 21-7, and Kennedale scores right before the half. They missed the extra point, so they were going to be down 8. And Denison was getting the ball to start the second half with a chance to go back up, making a 2-score lead. But basically, everything that happened in this game was on the ground. Kennedale, we talked about last week, they run the wing T, so they didn't have a passing yard amongst their 27 plays. They tried to throw it once. And Denison finished with 230 total yards in the half. 208 of that was on the ground. Majority of that, half of that basically was Jack Allman, 9 carries for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Michael Kennedy had 40 yards on a reverse. Ty Rhodes had a touchdown run as well, and so Denison gets the win. They really shut down Kennedale through the first quarter and a half before Kennedale finally started to find some things. They popped a couple runs. Which is what the wing tree tries to do with the misdirection and kind of catch you out of alignment and out of some gaps. And they did that in the final. They didn't get on the board until 2.5 minutes before halftime, but it was only 14-0. So they were still within striking distance. But it was looking good for Denison at that point when the game was stopped. The only bad thing, obviously, is you miss out on those reps to get ready for district play. Part of the reason they scheduled that game is because of they have opponents coming up that run that offense, and I'm sure they would have liked to have seen another 20 to 30 snaps against it just to feel better, see things that they do well, see things that they didn't do well on film to be even more prepared. But they were doing what they needed to do to build that lead, and then luckily for them, they were up at halftime when the game got called. This Greenville game is going to be interesting for no other reason that a week before they started practice, they had a coaching change, which is super weird, and it was a coaching change where they went outside the program to bring somebody in, so it wasn't like, okay, this coach is retiring or has a medical situation or has a off the field situation where they've been suspended or fired or something, and we're just going to elevate one of the coordinators and things will basically be the same. They literally made a change on a Monday, or the coach decided the announcement came on a Monday that the coach was leaving. Wednesday they hired the new coach was announced, and it was from outside. So it's gonna be interesting. And they, like I said, they opened with a win. They played Frisco Liberty, who's not very good. Sherman's gonna see them at the end of the year because they're in that district. And then they've had some issues the last couple weeks. So I don't know if we know exactly what to expect from Greenville, because I don't know how different they're going to look than they were last year, just because it's a new guy in charge. I don't know. I'm gonna do a deeper dive later this week to kind of just see how things, like, can you even look at last year's film? They did lose some key guys, some of their main guys that hurt Denison last year. Some really good athletes. They graduated, and so you have to kind of check to see how things are going with them as well. But obviously, if you're Denison going into this district, you have two of the top 15 teams or so in the state. Melissa is ranked number 1. They're off to an undefeated start. Terrell is off to another really good start. Lovejoy did lose last week against a 6A program, and they actually dropped out of the rankings, and they've got some injury issues. And we'll see them coming up soon. But Denison knows, we talked about this a little bit, Denison knows the path it needs to take. Last year it beat Greenville, Mesquite Poteet, and Princeton, and it was unable to beat the 4 teams in front of them. In order was Melissa, Lovejoy, Crandall, and Terrell. So you got to find a way to beat one of those teams, if not more of those teams, depending on, for tiebreaker purposes. You got to beat the teams you beat last year. Greenville was one of those teams. And so you don't want to fall behind your schedule from last year, because after this week, there's a bye mixed in there, but Denison will play the 4 playoff teams from last year all in a row before they get to the final 2 games. So you gotta get this taken care of this week. It's at home. I know it's homecoming, so there's all that jazz and pomp and circumstance around that going on this week. So hopefully that's not too big of a distraction. But you got to take care of business to stay on the path going into this upcoming month. That's probably going to decide if you go to the playoffs or not, because all those teams are looking at the same thing. They said, hey, we made the playoffs last year. We did it by beating Denison, so we've got to do that again if we want to hold our spot in the top half of this district, which is a very good district. Like we said, you have the number 1 team in the state. You have a team that has consistently been one of the best teams in the state, and you have 2 teams that think they own those other 2 spots going into the second year in this district. So it's going to be interesting to see what Denison does when they host Greenville for the 7-5A Division II opener on Friday night at Munson Stadium at 7:30. We do still have a couple of all-local matchups, so we'll highlight those next. There's 2 of those. One that we have is SNS at Whitewright. SNS played Connsville last week in a game that was shortened. It was 27-0 when that game got stopped, and Whitewright dropped to 1-2. They lost against Honeygrove 63-0. And this was a game that was a close game last year. SNS won 35-29. That was their only win last year for SNS. And Whitewright's coming off back-to-back games, which they've been shut out. So that's obviously a concern offensively for what the Tigers are going through right now. And it's if I don't know how much you can compare to last year, because obviously Whitewright has a new coach, have a new system. SNS is obviously struggling. They're trying to get some positive momentum, and this was, like I said, this was a game last year that did. We talked about last year that their games were, they were playing better people, they were playing closer, and in their district they only have to win 1 or 2 games to be in the mix, but they weren't able to do that. So this is a confidence booster type of game. Like we said, you have 2 teams that are coming off outings where things did not go very well on either side of the ball, and somebody's going to come out of here probably feeling pretty good. Okay, we're back on track. We're district plays around the corner for both of them, and I think that's one of those deals where you want to try to build that momentum, and honestly, your opponent's coming in feeling the same way. So there's urgency on both sides. And so that's obviously going to be an interesting matchup to watch. White Wright was able to, even though they lost this game last year, they were able to get into the playoffs. It didn't hurt them, and obviously SNS won, but they weren't able to turn that into anything. So we'll see what happens as SNS goes to White Wright on Friday night for that all-local non-district matchup. The other local, the all-local matchup is a battle of Bulldogs. Howe is going to go to Tioga. Howe is coming off a 32-10 loss against Commerce. This game was stopped late in the third period. So Howe was 1-2, and Tioga waited out their delay against Valley View, and they won 66-20 to improve to 2-1. This was a game last year that Howe won 42-14, and so I think when you look at this game, you obviously have two teams kind of going in the opposite directions. In that Howe's had some struggles, they've had some injuries. They did get a win last week 2 weeks ago against Tom Bean, and then they weren't able to kind of carry that over against a Commerce team that is undefeated and is really good offensively, has some really good athletes. So I don't know how much you can look at the final score. I don't know, obviously, if it would have gotten any closer, if they would have played a full fourth quarter. But again, this is sort of the thing when you look at last year. Obviously Howe lost against Commerce, was able to come back, get a positive result in this matchup, and they ultimately went on to make the playoffs. I think obviously the biggest thing with them is what are they doing in dealing with the injuries, and trying to keep it close, trying to get people more acclimated to some roles that they weren't in previously. In this game they didn't have an offensive touchdown. Jonathan Garcia kicked a field goal, 25-yard field goal, and Braden Ulmer had a 99-yard kickoff return. But offensively, still trying to work on that. Knox Bounds had 16 carries for 66 yards. Colin Murphy, who taken over at quarterback for Cooper Jones, was at 12 carries for 37 yards. Did complete 6 of 11 passes for 60 yards and an interception. Braden Ulmer was the recipient of most of that, with 5 catches for 37 yards. But obviously, playing from behind and trying to figure things out, hasn't helped Howe. Whereas Tioga lost their first game against Collinsville. They've gotten better each week. They won a couple weeks ago against SNS. They won big last week against Valley View. Put up 30 points in the first quarter of that game on the way to the win. And really pulled away. Valley View did have a couple of long touchdowns. They tried to get back into it. It was 37-14 at half, and then Tioga kind of broke things really open in the third quarter to get the win there, 66-20. And it was there was a lot of people contributing to that, as you would sort of expect with 66 points. Hayden Hilliard, 17 of 28 passing for 266 in yardage, had 3 touchdowns, and also ran for a score. Gage Anderson, 9 carries for 126 yards and a touchdown. Jonah Grubbs, 6 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. Caden Maldonado, 6 catches for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. Slade Babbitt, 3 catches for 39 yards. Austin Norwood had a kickoff return of 69 yards for a touchdown. Jake David returned the opening kickoff 61 yards for a touchdown. Johnny Dorpinghouse had a touchdown catch. Jonathan Hernandez scored on the ground. So a lot of spreading around of the points in this one. And I think we talked about early, especially after that first loss against Collinsville. You have a new coach, new staff, whole new system. To where you're throwing a ton. They didn't throw. There was actually more balance in this one. I don't know if that was more weather conditions or taking what the defense was giving the Bulldogs, but it's one of those things you just kind of have to you got to get in a rhythm. You got to figure it out. And Tioga's done that in the last couple of weeks. They've gotten better every week. And obviously when you're playing Collinsville, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, they're one of the top teams in 2A regardless of division. Their offense is really good. And so trying to keep pace with them is no small task. But the last 2 weeks the Tioga's done a really good job. Obviously they want to look to keep that momentum. They've won back-to-back games, push it to a winning streak. This week, you're at home. And I think it could be very well a contrast in styles. You're gonna have I think Hal's gonna want to continue to keep the ball on the ground, and Tioga's gonna want to take it to the air. So that'll be an interesting matchup between Hal and Tioga at Tioga for that non-district all local matchup on Friday night. Outside of the big two in district and outside of the two all local matchups, which obviously always interest people, when it comes to the remaining games that are non-district, there's probably none bigger in 3A this week, and there may not be any bigger in the state, as the Gunner Tigers will be hosting Brock. Gunner comes in at 3-0. They won last week 38-0 against Trinity Christian Addison in a game that was stopped at halftime due to the weather. And Brock is 1-2. They are coming off a 35-27 loss against Wimberley. Last year, of course, this was a defensive battle, 21-16 won by Gunner, in a game where special teams and defense got the better of the offenses. And we said at the time last year, these teams are going to make deep runs. They've been making deep runs, so don't be surprised when they do that. And of course, Gunner went on to win the 3A Division II championship, and Brock ended up going to the 3A Division I championship game, losing by a field goal to Franklin. And so this should be a great game. I remember it says Brock is 1-2. Well, last year at this time Brock was 0-3, and after losing to Gunner, they were 0-4. And what did they do? They won 11 games to get to the title game, and then they lost there. So non-district schedules you have to take with a grain of salt, especially in Brock's case because they're playing a murderer's row that includes Gunner. And you have Gunner's ranked number 2 in 3A Division 2. Brock is number 3 in 3A Division 1. Everybody's going to be looking at this one for another close game because I think both teams are capable of winning this game. There's going to be talent all over the field. Again, if it would be no surprise if both of these teams are in the title game, in their respective title games again next year. And as for Gunner, they continue to roll because that's what Gunner does. Like I said, they were up 38-0 at halftime last week in a game that was probably going to be even more lopsided if they would have been able to continue. Walker Overman goes 7 of 11 for 203 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also led in rushing, 3 carries for 63 yards. Preston Tarpley got in a little quarterback action, had a touchdown pass. Also kicked a 25-yard field goal. Mitchell Gage, 2 catches, 81 yards and a touchdown. Colin Peacock, 2 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. Jace Martin had 2 catches, both went for touchdowns. One came from Overman, one came from Tarpley. Cade Dodson had a 50-yard interception return to get his 3rd interception in 2 games. And Gunner shut down Trinity Christian Addison. Didn't get to 70 yards in this game. Had 2 turnovers in the limited amount of snaps due to the half. And so it's been what you've expected from Gunner so far. Obviously Walnut Grove put up some points on them, but they still won by 40. And you're talking about a team that won its first game by 46 points, and then won this game by 38 and shut out an opponent. And so they've had 3 lopsided games, which we kind of expected because One, they did it to some of these people last year, but it's also they've got a great program and they're just moving along. And so this was going to be the first real test. I think no offense to the first three opponents, but obviously this is the one I think a lot of people circled. There's going to be a lot of eyes on it, and the best part about this game is no matter who wins, it's going to make everybody better for having played this game, and you just hope everybody gets out injury free. But it's going to be, like I said, there's a lot of eyes on this one, just like there were last year, and to have it come down to the end. I think it could go either way. I think either team could win. I think it could come down to the end. If you told me either one of them won by multiple touchdowns, I'd believe it because, like I said, both teams are just so good that I don't know if you could ask for, as close a game as last year. But again, it's gonna be fun to see what happens as Gunnar hosts Brock. And this could be, obviously we don't know how things are gonna go realignment wise. There's a chance that Gunnar moves up to Division I. I haven't really researched the alignment, but Brock almost went to 4A last year. I don't know if there's a decent chance that Brock goes to 4A Division II next time. This could be a district game because obviously Brock's in with Whitesboro right now. It would be interesting to see, depending on how things played out with some of the other districts in this area and some of the teams, whether they would go up or down. They might be able to slide Gunnar right into that district. I don't think they will. It's easier probably maybe to have them go east if that were to happen. But so this could either be a district preview and we would get this a couple more times, or we could be talking about maybe a state semifinal situation because Brock is in Region 1 right now, and I assume they would put Gunnar in Region 2. So that would obviously be something to look forward to as well over the next couple of years. So definitely a huge game between Brock and Gunnar coming up at Gunnar on Friday night. Van Alstyne, who did not play last week, we mentioned obviously they had a bye, so they're only playing 9 games this year. They are back in action this week, so they're 1-1, and they go to Sulphur Springs, who is 2-1 after they won 35-21 against Hallsville. This was a game Sulphur Springs won last year, 45-15, and I don't know what to expect. Obviously, like we said, last year Van Alstyne played the week before. They had played Anna, and that did not go very well, but they at least played the week before leading into this matchup. They're coming off the win over Lebanon Trail, and then obviously they opened with the close loss against Pottsboro, who we will talk about here in a minute, and how they are off to a 3-0 start. So obviously that's not a bad loss. And you beat a 4A team a 5A team in Lebanon Trail, and now you're going to play a 4A team in Sulphur Springs. And it's going to be interesting to see if there's a little rust to knock off, or if the layoff actually helped, as opposed to coming off, a lopsided loss last year, and they have to turn around and play another good opponent. So this is one of those games. I think you just kind of show up, wait and see. And again, it's not gonna really affect you in the long run as you get ready for district play. But obviously you're gonna get a road trip out of it, a pretty decent little road trip for Van Alstyne, going to Gerald Prim Stadium. And we'll just see what happens. I think this is one of those, I don't know what you can predict off of a scenario where a team's been off for a couple weeks, but they are feeling confident, and we'll see what happens as Van Alstyne goes to Sulphur Springs on a Friday night. We have a team that did not play this week last year, and that's the Whitesboro Bearcats. They are hosting an Oklahoma opponent. They are welcoming Sulphur for a non-district contest. Whitesboro is 1-2 after they lost last week 49-30 against Pottsboro, and Sulphur is also coming off a rivalry loss. They lost 15-14 against Davis, and they're 0-2. And so this obviously is a game, for those who remember last year, This game is supposed to be up in Oklahoma. Whitesboro's going to go on the road, and Sulphur's coach passed away unexpectedly the Sunday of that week. They were supposed to play that Friday. He passes away 6 days before. Obviously, they make the decision to cancel that game. They weren't gonna ask Sulphur to play that game that week, and so they didn't play. So Whitesboro had an extra bye in their schedule last year because of that. But they're gonna play this week. This is the first time Whitesboro's played an Oklahoma team since 2005. It's only the sixth time in their history. And it comes at a time where they're trying to get back on track. Obviously they lose to Bells. They lose this last week to Pottsboro in a game that got delayed a couple times because of the weather. They started late, and then they played, and then they stopped, and then they resumed. And it was after midnight or pretty close to it when this game finally got done. And it was a game they were playing from behind for a big chunk of it. They tried to get back in it. Pottsboro came up with some counter punches to win this game 49-30. And so now you have them trying to pull out of the skid. You don't want to get to three in a row because they have district coming up next week. They're one of the teams that'll start district play. So you want to have that positive note. It was weird last year because I think you're planning to have this game and then you don't have it, and then you go into district off an extended break. And obviously it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, same thing with Sulphur. They're coming off a close loss against their rival. They need something going because they haven't won a game yet. And obviously, Whitesboro's showed they've had some offense. They put up some points in both of these losses. It's just defensively, they haven't had a chance to give the offense a chance to win the game because they've been playing from behind and having to put up some big scores. Now losing to Pottsboro, no shame in that. Losing to Bells, no shame in that. Those two are still undefeated, and we'll talk about Bells' situation in a minute. But again, you lose a game 49-30. And again, you put up some good numbers. You run for over 200 yards. You throw for almost 250 yards, and you end up losing. So that's obviously frustrating. Max Parker, 19 carries, 137 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Clay Hermes, 12 of 23 passing, 248 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Brett Donaldson, 5 catches for 95 yards and a score. Carter Sluter, 2 catches for 79 yards and a score. And like we said, just unable to slow down a Pottsboro running game that ended up with almost 500 yards rushing. They had over 700 yards, almost over 600 yards of offense, almost 700 yards. And obviously that's the main focus. They've got guys who can make plays on offense. We've seen that through the 3 games, whether it's on the ground or through the air. It's just that they've got to figure out some things defensively. And again, we're talking about district play starting next week. You have Brock waiting. Paradise is off to a really good start. They're ranked right now, and that's a team that would love to get some revenge on you because you've beaten them multiple times, including in the playoffs last year. And I think it could be a messy district to try to get into. So you're going to want to straighten things out there. And like I said, you're at home. It's an unfamiliar opponent, so that's obviously going to be interesting. But you've got to figure it out, and you got to figure it out quick before we get going in these district games. And like we said, the offense is putting up the points. If you just get you don't have to go super aggressive in making plays defensively. If you just get 2 or 3 drives stopped, then I think you're going to be in a really good spot if you're Whitesboro. And obviously they've got kids that have been a part of some deep runs the last couple of years that are seniors now, and they want they want to go out on a good note as well. And I think they're probably a playoff team. We won't know for sure. Kind of see things what look like when we get into district play. But obviously it's going to be a battle in that district. It has been the last couple of years, and Whitesboro's been in the mix and they want to stay there. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back as they host Sulphur, Oklahoma on Friday night. We mentioned the Bells Panthers. They are another one of those teams that did not play last week. Their game against Parish Chisholm, they were supposed to go on the road, but they did not because of an accident involving a junior varsity player as they were getting ready to come play the JV game here or in Bells on Thursday. There was a car accident or a truck accident, I guess, depending on what you want us to talk about the vehicle. As the latest that I've seen, things are okay in regards to that player in terms of the injuries. It wasn't a situation that could have been much worse. There could have been a much worse outcome than there is. It's obviously not a great situation. But it is a lot better than what it could have been, and so everybody obviously is thankful for that, and so thankfully that's the good news there. But obviously when that happened, they made they ended up canceling that game out of respect for that situation. So Bells did not play last week, so they're at 2-0, and they're facing an opponent in Pilot Point. They're hosting Pilot Point, who also did not play last week. Obviously, theirs was a different reason. Theirs was weather related. Pilot Point's 0-2. They were supposed to play Farmersville, and that game got delayed because of the weather, and then they just didn't pick it up or try to start it again. They just said, okay, whatever. So Pilot Point is coming in at 0-2. This was a game, last year Bells won 56-19. And again, I think obviously Bells was in good shape. You would think that they would. You're facing a team that is struggling. They lost 55-24 against Callisburg to open the season. They've had some struggles. They have a new coach over at Pilot Point. That was a late change. A lot of changes on the coaching staff. Some people transferred out. And so they're kind of trying to find their way over in Pilot Point. And they start district next week. They're actually playing Whitesboro to open district play. So they're trying to get some positive momentum. The only thing about this game, like we said with Van Alstyne, you have an unexpected rest. Obviously, you practiced all week planning to play a game that didn't end up happening. And so you've got this extended break. How do you handle coming off of that? And both teams are going to deal with it. So that's obviously the interesting thing about this game. But obviously Bells is off to a good start. They beat Munster rather handily. They beat Whitesboro by double digits. I think they would have gone and they would be sitting here at 3-0 if they had gone and actually played the game at Chisholm. I think Pilot Point probably would have lost to Farmersville, just based on how things were looking and how Farmers was off to a good start. So I think it would have been 3-0 versus 0-3. But either way, it's gonna be interesting to see. It's one of those things about who comes out. Does one team come out slower than the other? Do they both come out kind of rusty to figure out what they're gonna do? But I would expect Bells to be in a good spot hosting Pilot Point in their non-district matchup on Friday night. We mentioned Pottsboro, obviously, because they were playing Whitesboro, and how they were off to a 3-0 start because they did beat Whitesboro 49-30. They are hosting Munster. This is a 7 o'clock start at Jim Henderson Memorial Stadium. So like we said, Pottsboro's 3-0. Munster is 1-2. They actually won last week 16-6 against Windthorst, and that was a game that had worked around some weather issues. Otherwise they could be. They're that close to being 0-3, which is rare for Munster. Obviously, as good a two-way program as they are. The one thing to note about them is obviously they win last week, scoring only 16 points. They have not scored more than 19 points in a game this season, and Pottsboro has been putting up points, and obviously they're doing it on the ground with Major McBride and a cast of characters around him, and last week was no exception. He had 37 carries for 231 yards and 6 touchdowns to lead Pottsboro to that win over Whitesboro. Caden Humphrey, 16 carries for 137 yards. He was also 15 of 23 passing for 185 yards, and they had a touchdown pass to Xavier Brady. That was his only catch for 28 yards. Cameron Saunders led the way passing-wise, 9 receptions for 105 yards. Brady Fulton had 4 catches for 43 yards. And I think the biggest thing about that balance, and I say balance because Pottsboro ran for 485 yards and threw for 185 yards, is the story for Pottsboro, because we've said it every week, has been Major McBride. They've scored 15 touchdowns on the season through 3 games, and he's scored 14 of them. And I think, obviously, you've got to be able to show that you can do some other things to keep him being as successful as he is. And I think last week was a real good step in that direction. With Humphrey, we talked about the battle at quarterback was going to be with some young guys, some new guys taking over. He won the job. He's gotten better, every week. The completion percentage is really good. Spreading it out to some more guys this week is really good. 5 different guys caught passes. And I think you need to keep defenses honest. You need to put stuff on film where they go, okay, we cannot just look at number 5 and try to shut him down. And if we do that, we stop the Pottsboro offense. So they've gotten better at that, and I think that's going to go a long way. But obviously, when you have a playmaker that you can rely on in Major McBride, you're going to do it. And then he did that last week with another huge game to help them start 3-0. Munster is interesting. If you want to play comparison games, obviously we've talked about them a couple times because they played Bells and lost to them. And if you want to play the game of Munster lost to Bells, and then Bells beat Whitesboro by 11, and Pottsboro beat Whitesboro by 19, does that make Pottsboro a little bit better than Bells? And if you want to play comparative scores, you can do that. But I think if Munster wants to stay in this game, they've either got to put up a bunch of points or they've got to find a way to slow down Pottsboro, and I don't know if they can do both at the same time. So this was a game last year that Pottsboro won 50-15, and Pottsboro's had the better of this matchup in the recent meetings. Pottsboro's won 3 of the last 4, and in all the victories, Munster has not scored more than 2 touchdowns. So that's sort of the key. Maybe you don't have to put up 50, but obviously Pottsboro's done a really good job defensively against Munster the last couple times out, and if you do that again, you're going to be in good shape in trying to stay undefeated as they get ready for district play coming up here in a couple weeks. Moving down to the last couple of games at the 2A level, Tom Bean is hosting Como-Picton. Tom Bean is 2-1, 23-0 against Chico in a game that was weather shortened. Como-Picton lost 45-0 against Queen City, so they're 1-2. This was a game last year that Tom Bean won 30-18. This was also the last victory for Tom Bean last year. They did not win it. They finished with 2 wins. So if they win this game, they got 3. And that would be a good improvement, like we talked about with Tom Bean. As they get ready for district play coming up, they are not eligible for the playoffs. So the question is, how much improvement can you put over year 1 under Coach Fex? Last year they won 2 games. The scores were the margins of defeat were better, you have a chance right now to be improving your win total, see what you can do against your district opponents, see what realignment does to you, and then potentially turn that into a playoff push next year because of that. And it was a good early showing against Chico last week. It started with a kickoff return, 88-yard kickoff return to open the game by Hagan Darney for a touchdown, and then Bobby Rogers had a touchdown run. McGuire Poole had a touchdown run, and then Daniel Ruiz Gonzalez kicked a field goal. And Tom Bean, pretty much dominated the start in a game that last year they lost that game 21-7. So again, if you want to sit there and compare, even though the game didn't get played to the completion, you saw that was one of those things where we were better against that team. They beat Cumbie to open the season better than they did last year. They played some people tougher, better than they did last year in that loss to Howe. And can you continue that improvement and just keep that going throughout the year, knowing that you have to build for next year. So gonna be interesting to see what happens with Tom Bean if they kind of keep that mojo going and keep that building going. Como-Picton, again, like I said, hasn't had a lot of success. They've only got one winning season in the last 20 years. So it's a good spot for Tom Bean at home to kind of have a little success there. Kind of feel good for multiple weeks in a row. Kind of get that momentum going for them. And then if the Brock Gunner game is, like I said, not maybe the big game in 3A. The big game in 2A might be Collinsville at Cooper. This is a game that was Collinsville's only lost last year in the regular season. Cooper's 2-1. They won 47-27 against Lone Oak last week. Collinsville had their game stopped against SNS. They were up 27-0, and that was in a quarter of play before they had a couple of delays there. Collinsville's undefeated. You want to talk about an almost perfect quarter. That was Logan Jenkins last week. 10 of 11 passing for 295 yards. He had 4 touchdown passes, and it was, like I said, almost perfect. Rylan Newman, 3 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colin Barnes, 4 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Reed Patterson had 65 yards receiving and a touchdown that was off a hook and ladder to open the scoring 15 seconds into the game. And so Collinsville, we've talked about their offense is just it's really good. They lost a key player in Carter Scott, who's still out, but they have no problem slinging it around and making it work. And they've got really good athletes. They are ranked. They were number 4 last week in the rankings. They stayed at number 4 in 2A Division 2, and Cooper is ranked number 6 in 2A Division 1. And like we said, this was a game last year. Collinsville's only lost in the regular season 33-21, and both teams went on to have good playoff pushes. We've mentioned it the last couple of years, obviously, because Rod Castorena, the former Gunner coordinator, has been at Cooper now for this is his 6th season there, and they're trying to win their 5th district title. They're going to be in a good position for that, and obviously Collinsville's going to get some revenge. I don't think they need to be motivated a whole lot, but this is one of those weeks they definitely don't need to motivate them. They know this is going to be a good game. It's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a game where they have to go all out to get a win against a team that not only knows they can play with them, but they beat them, and they beat them by double digits on their on Collinsville's field last year. So like I said, we've got 2 really good matchups that I think statewide people are looking at the lower levels, with that Brock Gunner matchup at the 3A level, and then with this game in the 2A level. Like I said, if it's not if it's not the best game, it's definitely one of the ones up there that people are going to be paying attention to, and I'm interested to see what the outcome is, just because of, again, these are the sort of matchups you like to see in non-district. Good teams not afraid to play each other. It doesn't matter in the long run about wins or losses. It's about, we know we're both good. We need to be challenged. We want to challenge our kids to play in a game like this, play a good opponent, see what we're made of if it comes down to the fourth quarter or a final drive, or we have to get a stop on a final drive. That stuff pays off in the long run. And I know everybody wants to sit there at the end of the season and go, oh, we're 15-0, we're 16-0, whatever. In the long run, nobody cares. If you get to the state championship game, that's all that matters. And if you get there, if you're Brock and you get there with 5 losses, or you're Gunner and you get there with no losses, nobody cares. You're there, you're playing for a championship, you get to say you're a champion or you're a runner-up. That's what matters the most. So I'm glad that a game like this is on both of their schedules, and we'll see what happens if Collinsville can get a little bit of revenge going to Cooper on Friday night. And the last game on the schedule this week, down in the TAP 6-man ranks, we've got Texoma Christian going on the road to face Weatherford Grace Christian. And this is a game actually that's on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and it's actually at Azle Christian, who is in Texoma Christian's district. And the reason for that is Weatherford Grace Christian is a brand new program, so they're kind of hopping around field wise. They're playing a couple of their games at Azle Christian because I'm assuming they don't have a field that's completely ready for them. It doesn't sound like this is a situation where they were an 11-man dropping down. They're just a brand new program, and for whatever reason they're having to play their game somewhere else. But that's fine. Texoma Christian is 2-1. They lost last week 12-0 against Garland Christian. That game was stopped in the third quarter because of weather. And Weatherford Christian is 1-2. They lost last week 53-6 against Mineral Wells Community Christian. So we talked about Texoma Christian last week. Obviously 2-0 start, best season already in like 5 years. I guess the thing for them that is frustrating obviously is you're losing 12-0 and it's early in the third quarter. So who knows? You could be 3-0. Again, stuff like that doesn't matter. But it would have been interesting obviously to see if they would have been able to win that game to go to 3-0. And things we talked about with this program, things are on the upswing. They have been better. If you're gonna have a loss and have it only be 12-0 or only to have it be a close game early in the third quarter, considering the weather situation, that's a good thing for them. I think this is a game. I think again all the games that TCS have been competitive, except for the first one that for them in terms of being a competitive opponent, a game they can win. I think this is another opportunity for them to do that this week. In the 2 losses for Weatherford Grace Christian, they've only scored 1 touchdown in the 2 losses. One of those that coming last week. The other game they got shut out. So, and again, you're kind of on equal footing because since TCS didn't play last year and you have a brand new program in Grace Christian, you're sort of on that equal footing of experience wise. There's probably going to be a lot of people on the field that don't have a whole lot of experience football wise, and so maybe that makes it a little more even of a game. But I like Texoma Christian's chances. Obviously, that's a nice little road trip to make, especially on a Thursday. But it could be a beneficial one and a successful one. So we'll see what happens with TCS on Thursday night, 7 o'clock at Weatherford Grace Christian. So that's a look at week 4 and a look back at week 3. I think we're gonna have a nice normal Friday night. It won't be 100 million degrees. Hopefully we don't have any more rain and thunder issues. I know there might be a little in the forecast, percentage-wise, depending on where you are. But hopefully we'll get back to normal. We'll just have a nice, normal, fun Friday night. It may have taken a month to get there, but hopefully we will. So enjoy the game you're at. Stay safe if you're making a road trip. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast, and we will talk to you next week.